Welcome back. A new report reveals that disadvantaged communities across New York are being hit hardest by the rapid expansion of massive warehouses, bringing increased diesel truck traffic, pollution, and serious health risks like asthma and heart disease. Joining me now is the project manager of Zero Emissions Trucks Initiative for the Environmental Defense Fund, Sam Becke, as well as the senior transportation planner for the NYC Environmental Justice Alliance, Kevin Garcia. Thank you both so much for joining us this morning.
Thank you for having
Thanks
us.
for having us.
So to kick things off, just tell us a little bit about the 2025 Warehouse Boom Report and what is it all about?
This report, which Environmental Defense Fund released in collaboration with Electrify New York, provides new data at the state, regional, and legislative district level, detailing the massive expansion of warehouses and the associated health impacts. Across the state, we find nearly 3,000 mega warehouses, and these warehouses compose almost enough square footage to blanket the entirety of Manhattan. As a result of the warehouse boom, 1 in 4 New Yorkers now lives within half a mile of these mega warehouses, and more warehouses than ever before are located next to schools, homes, and community centers. A single warehouse can generate up to 1,000 polluting truck trips in a single day, and as a result of the warehouse boom, we're seeing that we're seeing that close to 250,000 of these truck trips are being generated by warehouses. Each of these truck trips releases toxic pollution that can cause a harmful environment for warehouse workers and for people living close by.
Yeah, absolutely. And now, New York City is a hub for everything. You name it, right? Bars, restaurants, clubs, shopping centers. But now warehouses are also booming in the city. What's driving this trend?
So the warehouse boom is being fueled by the rise in e-commerce. As a result of increased demand for e-commerce, we've seen warehouse square footage and the truck trips coming to and from these warehouses increase exponentially, with the largest increase coming over the last 5 years, which corresponds with the COVID-19 pandemic. This isn't just an issue that impacts people in the Bronx or New York City. People across the entire state are suffering from a massive expansion in polluting diesel truck trips associated with the warehouse boom. It's also an issue that's impacting people in legislative districts that have little to no warehouses, and that's because the increased demand for e-commerce is creating an increase in the truck trips originating in nearby districts and truck trips that are crisscrossing these districts that have little to no warehouses.
Sam, thank you so much for sharing that. Kevin, tell me, what are your thoughts on this as well?
Yeah, so what we've seen is the rise in online shopping and the sighting of these e-commerce warehouses that do not go through any public or environmental review, and this is really because of our antiquated zoning regulations. But what's really disheartening to see is who is affected most by this expansion. So this report highlights that warehouses are disproportionately located in state-defined disadvantaged communities. And while these communities make up just over 8% of the state, half of these facilities are in these communities. But we're also seeing the widespread racial disparities among who lives near these facilities. So in New York, Black and Hispanic/Latinx communities are 1.5 times more likely to live within a half mile of a warehouse than compared to the state's demographics.
Yeah, and I like how you mentioned it's just this rise of e-commerce and consumerism we're seeing on social media. There's just this trend in shopping and influencing and all this kind of stuff that in my perspective, I feel could also lead to that as well. Again, especially in New York City. Now, tell me, you mentioned it a little bit about who's mostly affected by this expansion. And for a lot of New Yorkers who don't necessarily know about this at this moment, tell me a little bit about why should they care? Why do they need to care?
Yeah, so first and foremost, we need to understand who lives near them. So these are the communities, some of that are the lowest income households, communities of color that have historically been disproportionately impacted by the siting and operation of polluting infrastructure, whether it's peaker power plants, bus depots, and highways, right? So, when we look at, for example, the Bronx, it has some of the worst air quality and some of the highest asthma rates, where about 1 in 5 children have asthma. And that impacts the child's life. So that impacts their physical, emotional, and academic growth. And it also impacts their family as well, where the parent will have to miss work because they have to now go take their child to the doctor's appointment or pick their child up from school when they're having an asthma attack. And everyday New Yorkers should care about this, because as Sam mentioned, this is not just a New York City issue. This is not a downstate issue. This is an issue across the entire state. And even though you may not have a facility in your community or in your neighborhood, you're also feeling the secondary impacts of these facilities. The increased truck traffic, the increase in pollution. So unless these facilities are regulated, we're going to continue seeing all of that.
Yeah, absolutely. And now one thing that I'm seeing here is the massive increase in warehouses are also leading to a massive increase in diesel trucks, correct?
Yes.
So tell me a little bit again about that and the impact that that's also having on top of the warehouses.
Diesel trucks, which include delivery vans, box trucks, and semi-trucks, release large amounts of pollution, including nitrogen dioxide and small particulate matter, particulates that are so small they get lodged deep within our lungs, where they begin to wreak havoc. Exposure to pollutants like nitrogen dioxide and small particulate matter cause thousands of diseases across the state each year, like asthma, COPD, and stroke, and they also cause hundreds of deaths each year. Despite the fact that these diesel trucks make up a small percentage of vehicles that are on our roads, they make up a disproportionately large fraction of the transportation sector's total pollution. And so what we're seeing is in the Bronx County, which has one of the highest asthma rates in the entire country, an annual estimated 1 in 5, or 2,800 new childhood asthma cases are caused by nitrogen dioxide pollution, which is a main pollutant released by diesel trucks.
Yeah, thank you once again for sharing that. And I want to go back to, Kevin, what you mentioned earlier about where these warehouses are placed. Now, it says here that 50% of warehouses are in disadvantaged communities, which is only 8.1% of the state. So can you give us some insight into how did that happen?
Yeah, a lot of this is because, of previous planning or policy decisions, right? So, when we look at New York City, it's like redlining, but also discriminatory housing policies, but also, our antiquated zoning regulations. So, in many cities, a lot of these warehouses are not defined, and they're allowed to be built as of right without any community or environmental review. And a lot of these warehouses also a lot of these warehouse developers and operators like to build and operate near highways because they're trying to meet that, same day, next day delivery demand. So they need to be able to move the goods in and out of the warehouse as quickly as possible.
Absolutely. And I'd love to hear both of your opinions on this. Is this a case of environmental racism or economic neglect, or both?
I think it's definitely, environmental neglect due to, the previous decisions on where we site things and how, we allow people to live. And, we've basically have allowed these warehouses to, come up online without any environmental or public review. So a lot of communities are only finding out once they are there. And once they see this increase in traffic or increase in pollution, and we need to make sure that we're regulating these warehouse operators.
Kevin said it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I totally get it. And so in that, let's move on to the Clean Deliveries Act. What would this bill do, and how would it help reduce pollution?
Yeah, so at its core, what the Clean Deliveries Act would do is reduce emissions from these facilities. And it would be done by creating or establishing this process called an indirect source rule. So it's a process where the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation will look at all of these qualifying e-commerce warehouses and come up with individual plans for how to reduce the emissions. The warehouse operators would be given a menu of options for how they can do it, and then they would receive credits for how they're taking action to reduce the emissions. And the warehouse operators would have to also do annual reporting so that we're ensuring that they're meeting those goals.
Yeah, and I mean, with the bill, it would be easy to assume that companies can just clean up for themselves. But let's talk about why the legislation is so necessary to have that in place.
Yeah, it's very necessary because the transportation sector is the second largest contributor to greenhouse gas emissions. And we need to make sure that New York State and other states are also taking bold action to, address the climate crisis. And, by reducing the number of diesel truck trips, as Sam mentioned, even though they make up a small portion of the vehicles on our roads, they do contribute to some of the nastiest air. So by reducing the number of diesel truck trips, we're going to see that improvement in air quality. And, New York State would be the first state to enact a statewide policy like this if the Clean Deliveries Act is passed. But, it's not the first time, we've seen this in the United States. And I think, Sam, maybe you can share a little bit more about that.
Yeah, sure. So we've seen this indirect source review policy enacted in other states and sub-state jurisdictions across the country. Oregon, for example, has had a indirect source review to reduce pollution associated with the construction industry on the books for decades. And what we saw in 2021 is that the Los Angeles metro region took an innovative approach to reducing pollution associated with the e-commerce boom by enacting a bill, a rule much similar to Clean Deliveries Act, which is well on its way to reducing hundreds of deaths, thousands of asthma attacks, and tens of thousands of lost work and school days by 2031, while saving the region $2.7 billion. The benefits of the program are expected to outweigh the costs by a ratio of 3 to 1.
Absolutely. I want to thank you both so much for joining us. I feel like I've learned so much in this small amount of time, and I know our viewers have as well. So thank you again for joining us this morning.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for having us.
If you want to read more about the Warehouse Boom 2025 report, please go to the website on the screen below. We've come to the end of our show today. I'd like to thank all of our guests for joining and you, the viewers, for tuning in. If you missed any part of today's show, you can catch the recablecast at 5 and 8 p.m. tonight on Optimum Channel 67 and Verizon Fios 33, or watch anytime on the web at BronxNet.org. You can catch a brand new episode of Open with Darren Jaime on Wednesday and Reina Valentin on Friday. I'm Brittany Skyler. Stay informed, inspired, and safe. Talk soon.